Happy Migraine Awareness Month, everyone, and happy Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Day, or PTSD Awareness Day. It's a little bit easier to say in the short version. The two combine quite nicely because PTSD is far more prevalent in people with migraine than the rest of the population. And hot off the press is some new research looking at the genetic factors that kind of link the two disorders. Joining us to discuss this brand new paper that was only published about a week ago, we have Associate Professor Divya Mehta from the Centre for Genomics and Personalised Health at UT. Hi, Divya. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation.
All right, tell us a little bit about your paper. What were you looking for?
Yeah, so exactly as you had mentioned, people with migraine have high rates of PTSD, and patients with PTSD also have severe migraine. So for many years, we have known that the two conditions co-occur, but no one really knows why. So in this study, we wanted to find out what are the mechanisms. Could it be that there are common genes that underlie risk for both PTSD and migraine? And if so, what are these genes? So really, this was kind of the hypothesis that common underlying genes might kind of explain why patients with PTSD and patients with migraine have very similar symptoms, and these disorders co-occur in the patients.
Okay, so you did it through a twin study. Can you explain just a little bit about why a twin study is interesting and useful for these kinds of studies?
Sure. So when we think about diseases such as migraine and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, these are known as complex disorders. Complex means that they occur due to a combination of genetic as well as environmental risk factors. And one of the major problems we've had so far in research is the fact that we cannot disentangle genes from our environment. Mm-hmm. So this is where the twin study comes in. Twins are a very elegant way of looking at genes by actually comparing two people who are genetically identical. So in this study, what we've done is we've looked at identical twins which have the same DNA code. Since they have the same DNA code, in a way we have matched, or we have fixed the DNA code part of, the risk part. On the other hand, there could be different environmental factors that could drive the activity of our genes. So the activity of our genes is dynamic, and this could change. So in this case, we fix the genetic code part of it, but we're looking at the other part, which is different environmental factors that could drive activity of genes, and which in turn could lead to different symptoms and diseases.
So it reduces the variables quite nicely. So what did you find in your study?
So, of course, our study was mainly focused on PTSD and the fact that PTSD has different comorbidities, one of them being migraine. We were able to validate some of the previous genes that were known to be associated with PTSD. Additionally, we found some novel genes associated with PTSD. But the main interesting thing of this study is that among the genes that were associated with PTSD, we found a large number of genes that were previously known to be associated with migraine. Mm-hmm. So this shows us, kind of really strengthens our hypothesis that there are common underlying genetic risk factors or common genes that could drive the risk for both PTSD and migraine. On the other hand, we also looked at a more holistic, kind of a biological pathway level. So, what do these genes do? What biological pathways do they belong to? What are the mechanisms? And even at that level, at the biological pathway level, we found that among genes that are associated with only PTSD, and among genes that are associated with PTSD with migraine, or PTSD and migraine in our case, there are different pathways. That drive this kind of association. So it just shows that PTSD, which occurs by itself, and PTSD, which occurs due to genes that are also associated with migraine, are distinct. And this could have a lot of different clinical implications as well.
Yeah, I would imagine if you kind of essentially have two different types of PTSD, that's a fairly significant step forward. So is this the first scientific study that's been able to prove that link or connection between migraine and PTSD?
So the link between PTSD and migraine at a population level has been known for many years now. So as you mentioned, a lot of people have found that patients who have PTSD often suffer from chronic migraine, and vice versa. So patients with migraine do have high rates of PTSD. So this link is known, but our study is the first study to look at the genes, the specific genes that are possibly underlying this co-occurrence between PTSD and migraine. And our study is the first study to use this unique twin design.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic work. So what are the implications of this research for managing either PTSD or migraine?
So of course, as you can imagine, with clinicians, it's very important because often patients who have two symptoms of two different disorders have severe symptoms of that particular disorder, which means it's very important for clinicians who are treating patients with PTSD to know if the patients have comorbid conditions such as migraine, and the same holds true for patients with migraine who might have other comorbid conditions such as PTSD, but also other conditions such as depression. In the clinical level and at the pharmaceutical level, this is also very important. So just to give you an example, one of the genes that we found to be associated with PTSD and in migraine in this study is a gene that is currently being used in a clinical trial for migraine. So it's considered as a novel therapeutic target for migraine, but we know for a fact that this is a very well-known candidate for PTSD. Again, it's in very early stages, but it just shows us that there could be common, drugs that might target these kind of underlying genes, and this might help both the PTSD as well as the migraine symptoms, which really has huge clinical implications for patients.
That's amazing research. So what's next for your research? What do you need to do a bigger study?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a small study. This was a pilot study with some really interesting results. We would like to expand this, replicate this in a larger sample, just because we would like to test how robust and reproducible these results are. And additionally, having a larger sample means more power. We can identify a large number of genes possibly that strengthen our hypothesis of common genes that underlie the risk for PTSD and migraine. Another very important thing is the fact that a lot of the studies that we've done so far are a single time point study, so a cross-sectional study, but activity of our genes changes across our lifetime. So our gene activity can go up and down in response to different environmental and lifestyle factors. So it's not just okay for us to look at a single time point. What we need to do in the future is to look at multiple time points and see how these activity of our genes changes in response to different factors at different time points in our life, and what are the risk and protective factors that could change this gene activity.
That's such amazing work. Thank you so much for making the time, and we look forward to seeing more of this fantastic research on migraine as comorbidities.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation.